Hi, my name's Sarah Aldersign and I design for Aldersign Designs, and this is my tutorial on German short row shaping. Short rows are really good for adding a curve to a fabric, such as in when you're knitting a heel of a sock and you want the fabric to go round the heel. I'm going to show you two methods, one in stocking stitch and then following the same in garter stitch. I'll show you how to make some German short rows in stocking stitch. So in this case I've worked a few rows of stocking stitch and I've now knit to one stitch before the end of the row, which is where my turning point is. So I've knit the stitch that is my turning point. I've got one stitch left over. I'm going to turn the work so that the purl side is now facing, so the wrong side's facing. I'm now going to slip that first stitch from the left to the right hand needle or to the active needle. I'm then going to take the yarn over the top of the needle. This now makes this stitch, and you can fit a little bit of a tuck so you get this like loop on the top, so you get two stitches, two pieces of yarn on the front and two bits of yarn on the back. So it's not quite the same as a yarn over because you're trying to pull a little bit across, so you get this sort of double legged stitch. You then bring the yarn to the front of the work to work in purl stitch, and you purl to your next turning point. So on this bit of knitting I'm going to purl to one stitch before the end so it matches. So there we go, I'm now one stitch before the end. I'm going to turn the work round so the knit side or the right side is now facing me. I've got the one stitch on my right hand needle. I'm going to slip this stitch from the right to the left to the right needle or to the active needle, take the yarn over the top, and again you get this double stranded stitch, so two strands on the back, two strands on the front. Keep the yarn at the back of the work this time and then begin knitting the rest of that row. So I'm going to show both of those again. So this time I'm going to knit to one stitch before my previous German short row. The reason I like the German short rows is because when you get to the stitch it's really obvious as to which stitch you last turned at, because you get this double stranded stitch with the yarns looping around over the top of the needle, so you can almost not miss it, whereas sometimes in wraps and turns the wrap can be pulled tight and almost disappear into the fabric. So now I've knitted to one stitch before that. I've knitted that one stitch before my previous German short row. I'm going to turn the work around so the purl side is facing me. Slip the stitch from the left to the right hand needle. Take the yarn over the top, pulling it so that you bring this where the yarn is looped round up to the top of the needle, and you have two strands on the front, two strands on the back. Bring the yarn to the front of the work and work back in purl. So again I'm going to purl back until I've purled the stitch before my previous German short row. And so here I am again, and again this stitch was easy to find because you have this double stranded stitch with a loop of yarns crossing over at the top. I turn the work round so the right side or the knit side is now facing me. Slip that stitch from the left to right hand needle or to the active needle, bring the yarn over the top and give it a little tug so that you get this double stranded front and back stitch. Keep the yarn at the back this time and beginning back, go back to knitting. So I'll show it one more time. So I'm at the stitch, I knit the stitch before my previous German short rows, turn the fabric round so the purl side's showing, slip the stitch from left to right or to the active needle, bring the yarn back in front, pulling the yarn over the top to get this double stranded stitch on the right hand needle, yarn back in front to begin purling. Purl the stitch just before your turning point. There's my 2 previous German short rows that are quite easy to find. Turn the yarn round, the work round so that the knit side's facing you. Slip the stitch from left to right hand needle, taking the yarn over the top, giving it a little tug to get this double stranded stitch on the right hand needle, keeping the yarn at the back, yarn at the back of the work, and carry on knitting. So now I'm going to show you, just unravel some more wool, how to knit those stitches. So when you get up to the stitch that you previously had a German short row, so here it is, here's my first stitch. It's got 2 strands on the front, 2 strands on the back with this crossing of yarns at the top. You're going to knit, put the needle knitwise between the 2 strands. So I still have the 2 strands on the front and 2 strands on the back. So put it through both of those strands. So if I just show that again, you're going through and knitting it as if it's just one normal stitch. So there we go, that's knit, and that's my German short row. So I'm going to do that the same with the next one. So I put it in this needle in knitwise through the double strands. So the 2 strands on the front, stay on the front, 2 strands on the back, stay on the back, and knit it as normal as 1 stitch. And I will just do that for this final one. So I'm going to slip the needle in knitwise with 2 strands on the front, 2 strands on the back as if they're 1 stitch, and knit it, and I'm just going to knit that final stitch to finish. And now I'm going to turn the work and go back and do the purl ones. So I'm going to purl back to my first German short row on the other side. So here's my double stitch on this side, and I'm going to purl that exactly the same way. So my needle goes in purlwise with the 2 strands that were on the front of the needle on the front, 2 strands on the back, purl it as normal. Do the same for this one. So there's my 2 strands with the yarn crossed over at top. Slide the needle in purlwise and purl it as normal, and I'll just do one more. So again, needle in, and I'm just purling both of those 2 loops as if they were 1 stitch together. And that's my short row shaping. And it won't show very much well on here, but it actually has created a curve in this fabric here. So this is where my short rows are here. They are, I try and hold it in the centre. I don't know if you can see, but they are almost invisible as to where those short rows are. So it creates this lovely curve in the fabric. You cannot see where the short row shaping take place. It looks extremely neat, and that's another reason why I like this German short row shaping method. So I'm now going to show you how to do the same thing but in a garter stitch. So I've now knitted a couple of rows in garter stitch, and I'm going to show you the German short rows, how to do those in garter stitch. So again, on this row I've knitted to 1 stitch before the end of the row. So this is my turning point for this row. So I'm going to turn the work round so the wrong side, or the other side in garter stitch, is facing. And again, exactly like I did with the previous German short rows, I slip the first stitch to my right hand or active needle, bring the yarn over top, again so you get this double stranded stitch on the front and the back with the yarns looped round each other at the top. And instead of bringing the yarn to the front to begin purling, you keep it at the back and begin knitting. So you carry on working in garter stitch. So I'm going to knit to the other end of this row. So I've knit to 1 stitch before the end, and then you do exactly the same as what you did on the opposite side. So you turn the work around to face the opposite direction. So now I've got the right side facing me. I slip the stitch from my left hand to right hand needle, or the active needle, take the yarn over the top. So you've got this double stranded stitch on the front and back, keep the yarn at the back and carry on working in knit stitch. So really it's exactly the same as working stocking stitch, except you don't bring the yarn back to the front for the pearl, you keep it at the back to carry on knitting. I'm just going to show the same thing knitting English style, because I do knit continentally. So if I carry on knitting to my previous short row, and there we go, that's a stitch before this double stranded stitch of my previous short row. Turn the work around, slip the stitch from the left hand to the right hand needle, pick up my yarn again, bring the yarn over the top, pulling it so that you get this double stranded stitch on the front and back, and then begin knitting again. Here we go, here's my last stitch before my previous short row. I'm trying not to let go of the yarn this time. Turn the work around so that this is now the right side's facing me. Slip the stitch onto my right hand needle, bring the yarn over the top of the work and go back to knit. I'm not anywhere near as good English style. So I'm going to knit back now to my previous short rows. Instead of creating more short rows, I'm going to knit those in. So here's my first previous German short row, again easy to find. You put the needle in as if you're going to knit it as one stitch together with the 2 legs on the front, 2 legs on the back, wrap the yarn round and bring it through as one stitch. Do exactly the same for this one, so needle through, knit them together as one stitch, knit that last stitch. Now I'll just go back and show you on the other side. So there's no wraps to pick up and fuss with, trying to get them in the right place, needle in the right place. And it's a nice simple short row method that looks extremely neat when you've finished. So I'll just knit this one so I can show you how it looks in garter stitch when it's finished. Right, here we are, here's my previous short row. I put the needle into knit as if both strands are one stitch, so it goes through the middle of those stitches, wrap the yarn round, oops, missed it then, wrap the yarn round and bring it through as one stitch. And do the same for this one, so needle goes in knitwise as if that's just one stitch together and knit. I'll do that final one. So if I now turn this around to show you how that looks, it looks slightly different in the garter stitch because you can see where the short rows, if I move that tail of yarn, are. So you can see here the 2 stitches. And then the previous short rows are here as well, so the garter stitch rows are not as long, because, and so if you can see here, this one just goes between here and here rather than all the way to the end of the fabric. So you can see the garter stitch rows quite slightly more, but it still creates a nice neat method, and you can see the sort of bit of curve in the fabric there that's been created by the short row method. Thank you, I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial. See you next time.